Hello everyone. In this video, I'll be covering my discipline tips for Lady Ashvane on Mythic difficulty. Ashvane is definitely a big step up in difficulty from the first 3 bosses, whether you look at it from perspective of DPS, healer, or just mechanics as a whole. However, with a 3 tank 3 heal strategy, it's very easy to control the amount of damage that's coming into the raid, and from a healer's perspective, it becomes very easy to predict when the raid is about to take a hit and make sure we use our CDs accordingly. First, for talents, I would definitely take Sins of the Many here because DPS is extremely important. And Purge the Wicked versus Halo, I think you can use either. Halo is probably slightly better in terms of saving the raid, but if you start saving Halo for the burst timing windows, then it might do less damage to the boss than Purge the Wicked. Purge the Wicked does good enough healing with the added incentive that it becomes very easy to keep up the dot on the boss and do maximum amount of damage, so I opted to take that over Halo. If DPS is not an issue, you can take Shadow Covenant, but I still wouldn't recommend it as the more DPS you do, the easier this fight becomes. For your trinkets, Mechagon Trinket is definitely a necessity, especially on early progress when your DPS might not be there, and it will do around 10% of your damage if you use it properly. For the same reason, I opted to take Crucible as my minor because that also ends up doing a lot of damage over the entire course of the fight. And for the major, I took the Ever Rising Tide, knowing that I will not be able to use it on cooldown because of mana issues, but just to make sure that on the couple times where I have to do a lot of healing, that I have enough throughput to keep people alive. Outside of very specific moments, you don't really need to do insane amounts of healing, so rather than taking SSs that might net more HPS or more mana overall, I think taking the Ever Rising Tide to make sure that you do enough healing in those instances is a better idea. The fight is just under 8 minutes long, so if you use Shadow Fiend optimally, you'll be able to use it 3 times, but depending on where you use your CDs, you might only be able to use it twice. The times when you need to use your CDs is when the Rippling Waves are being popped, and there will be 9 instances of the Rippling Waves spawning throughout the fight. There will be 2 or 1 if your DPS is good in the first phase, and then 3 in the second phase, and likely 4 on the third phase. You are likely to be only able to use Evangelism once in each of these phase 1s, so most likely you will only use Evangelism 3, at most 4 times if you take the first one in the third phase. And that might feel like a waste, but once again, the only time healing is really needed is during the Rippling Waves, and outside of that, rather than spending your time ramping and trying to increase your healing, it's much better to just spam Smite and DPS as much as possible. It doesn't matter too much which of the Rippling Waves you're assigned to as a Discipline Priest, but the one that you really want to get is the one during Lust, which will be the 3rd Rippling Wave in the 3rd Shield phase. With Bloodlust, you'll be able to get a lot of Rapture Shields out into your Evangelism, as well as have a Shadow Fiend with high haste out, and your ramp alone should be enough to survive this part, which is likely one of the most dangerous parts of the fight. For barrier usage, I would say the 3rd Rippling Wave in the 2nd and the 3rd barrier phase is the most ideal place to use them because briny bubbles are formed right before those Rippling Waves are popped, and since those briny bubble targets will be stacked on top of the boss, the rest of the raid can just join them and drop a barrier on top. If done properly, only the tanks should need to be healed through the bubble debuffs, so just maintain your atonement on all the tanks that are taking damage. During intermission, it's important that the people who got targeted by the Azurite are topped off before their debuff expires, as it's very easy to die from the damage if they're not topped off. Otherwise, try to be one of the people that are more farther out to break the corals in case you get the debuff, since DPS is very important, and it's really bad for people who lose damage while moving to move out far in order to break corals, but it's much less big of a deal if a healer goes out of range in order to break the corals. Same thing with soaking the fragments once the corals break. Try to get to the ones that are farther away so that the DPS can focus more on doing damage and less on soaking the coral shards. Pain Sub is best used on the tank that's soaking the bubble on the 2nd set on the 2nd shield, where they will be going up close to 20 stacks. As a Discipline Priest on this fight, it's good to think of yourself as another DPS that uses their ramp in order to save the raid during a Rippling Wave. The more damage you do to the boss, the easier it gets to heal for yourself and other healers, because you might skip a Rippling Wave phase or the boss might die even though there are a couple of people dead. So make sure you hit that smite button as often as possible and use your penance and solace on cooldown, as well as schism if your ramp is not coming up anytime soon. If the other healers have the other Rippling Waves well covered, it's even fine to let Radiance cap so that you can do more damage. If you manage your mana properly, you can probably use 2 Unbridled Fury potions here as well. And if you're using a second Unbridled Fury potion, I recommend that you use it at the beginning of one of the exposed phases, as Unbridled Fury lasts 1 minute and so does exposed phase, so it'll do maximum damage to the boss. Lastly, since you're using the Mechagon Trinket on this fight, make sure you use Schism before you use a Trinket, as I believe that the damage gets amplified by Schism. And as you do this fight more and more, you'll realize when upsurges are coming up, and if your Trinket is up at the time, it's a good idea to use it as you're dodging the upsurge, as you can move and cast a Trinket at the same time. Otherwise, try to save a penance for these parts so that you can maximize damage while moving. If you're really struggling with mana, you can take Lucid Dreams over Ever Rising Tide. And if you have a lot of leech, it might be a good idea to volunteer to soak one of the small bubbles when a tank can't cover it. If the tank that's soaking the bubbles that gets rezzed in the 3rd shield phase needs a little bit of help getting to certain bubbles, make sure you position yourself properly at the right coral so that when they ask for a grip, you can grip them towards the bubble. If the fight is played out properly, each of the healers don't even need to do 50k HPS, so don't waste your mana trying to do healing when you don't need to, and really focus on damage. I can't stress enough how important this damage is in order to make this progression as short as possible. I hope that this video helped you plan out the fight as a Discipline Priest, and I'll see you guys on the next video.